ladies and gentlemen, in the blue corner, standing at a sleek 5'11", 245 pounds, the tumultuous tempest of technique, Thomas Lilley. And in the red corner, at a curvaceous 5'11", 315 pounds, the jovial juggernaut of judgment, John Sheridan. A meeting of the masters of mastication. Turn your attention as they delve deep into all things lifting and more. This is Peak Speak.
We are back. Another episode of Peak Speak. Welcome.
Back. Here we are. Hopefully we'll be less controversial this time.
John is dressed as if he's going to the snow.
As I mentioned to Thomas the first time he made that joke, which was about half an hour ago, it was 0.8 degrees when I left my house this morning at about 5:10, and the gym, not very well insulated, does stay quite cold.
I'm going to look up the temperature here because I'm currently in a t-shirt and zero pants, and it's quite balmy.
It is currently 1.8 degrees in Canberra, and according to the Bureau of Meteorology app, it feels like 0.1.
It is 18 degrees here.
Yep, that is 10 times the amount of degrees that it is here.
90% humidity.
That's about 85% too much.
The precip is 46%, which I imagine is short for precipitation.
You're such a genius.
Thanks. It's raining.
I'm surprised people don't more regularly talk about how intelligent and worldly you are.
See that? That's an atlas. But it's a stupid atlas because it's only got Australia on there, and it's got Australia on there twice.
So it's not an atlas.
Oh,
it's a ball with Australia on it.
It's basically Australians' view of the world.
Australia, mate.
All right, we're back for another episode of Peak Speak. I always said Speak Peak. And today we're talking about mindset in training.
Yes,
the other week
because we've done one about comp mindset.
Comp mindset, yeah.
Which is quite a good one, I think, if we don't say so ourselves.
Of course. Now we're talking about mindset in training. So,
yes.
Where do you want to start? What do you reckon?
Well, I think using our good friend of the show, Matt Stenzel's suggestion, I think perhaps we look at a somewhat phasic approach to what your mindset's going to be like at different points of a training cycle and what perhaps each part of said cycle involves from a mental focus standpoint. What do you need to be thinking about at each part of that training cycle, and what's it going to feel like? What are you going to expect? Those sort of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sweet. So
does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just so everyone else knows, that is the extent of the planning that goes into this Peak Speak, because we're #professionals.
Don't let them know what's happening. But I think it also enhances our cerebral nature and shows the people that we can talk on the fly and we are full of these ideas and concepts.
What we lack in planning and organizational skills, we make up for in sheer awesomeness.
And handsomeness. So we'll start with far away from competition. So immediately post-competition, coming into some sort of a conditioning phase. The kind of mindset that you're going to need to have, I guess. And I think to kind of spoiler alert, the kind of position that I'm going to be coming from. When you start training's really fun, and that's your incentive, that's your motivation, that's your driving force. After a while, it's just like getting a new job. You might enjoy your new job at first, but eventually it just becomes work. You want to progress, you have to work. Training is work. Work is not easy. If you're working to get better at something, it is not easy. And it means that you're going to have to do a lot of stuff that you're really shit at, and you're going to have to get better at those things. So inherently, eventually, this buzz that you get from training, the fun that you're going to get from training, it's not going to disappear, but it's probably going to change. And you're probably going to be more aware of the fact that it is work, and that, the work you have to do gets harder as you get more experienced because your progress becomes slower.
Yeah, and I actually think it's almost always that sort of 18 months to 2 year period. Like you've been training consistently for sort of a year and a half, nearly 2 years. Things start to get hard. You stop making the ridiculous gains you make in the early period. Maybe things start to hurt a little bit more because you're not quite keeping up with the recovery and those sort of things. And then all of a sudden, the good powerlifters stick around because they realize it's work and they realize that's part of the process. The people who leave are often the people who are unwilling to do the work. They realize that it's not going to be as easy anymore, and that's fine. You know, like not everyone has to be able to stick this out for 10 years because it's not suited to everyone. But there's a certain type of person that can get enjoyment out of the work. And I'm sure we've talked about it before. I feel like we talked about it in the last episode, that idea of process orientation in how you think about things, being able to understand that, like, yeah, it's going to be hard. It's definitely work, but you can take enjoyment out of that work. It can still be a fun environment. It can still be something that you enjoy the challenge week to week and the nuance that comes from trying to, you know, fix little technical issues and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of fun to be had. It just might be kind of slightly miserable fun.
Yeah. And later on, I think we should highlight the importance of community because that kind of feeds back into that. That was
exactly where I was going to go next, but we can save that for later.
Yeah. So, the conditioning phase, like imagine you've just come off a peak, you've just been as strong as you could be at that point in time, and now you're getting ready for, you know, your eventual run into another competition way later down the track. And it's like, generally after a comp, you need to come to a phase where you're building that work capacity again, where you're doing a lot of high reps at a pretty low percentage. For me and my lifters, I'm giving them like 50 to 65% higher volumes, lots of supersetting, true conditioning. And in terms of the mindset that you need to approach, this training is actually, it's pretty easy. The first couple of weeks are always uncomfortable. The first couple of weeks, you're getting those fucking horrendous back pumps, everything pumps, you're out of breath. The actual conditioning aspect is what's difficult. But we're generally pretty resilient and pretty quick to adapt to that kind of training. And once you do, you feel pretty good.
And you often leave training feeling really good as well, because it's not the sort of training like 6 weeks out from a meet where you're hammering away at things and you leave training feeling completely shattered and exhausted. Often with that sort of conditioning stuff, I find it feels miserable at the time, and then 10, 15 minutes later, I actually feel really, really good.
Yeah, you definitely get a bit of buzz.
And I think that's an important part of, like, an important principle overall, right, is understanding that you don't always have to leave the gym feeling shit and like you're completely wiped out. Like, I think there's this slightly meathead focused mindset where people feel like they have to completely trash themselves at all times of the year, regardless of what you're doing. And I think there is value in training within your limits occasionally so that you don't just feel fucking shit all the time. Like, you know, regardless of how good you are at powerlifting, it's not going to be your living. And so having something that just means you spend your whole life walking around miserable and in pain is maybe not very productive and a very good use of your time in the scheme of things.
Yeah, I don't know. For me personally, I feel like the conditioning phase, because that's actually probably one of my favorite phases of training. I like the really light, really high rep, high volume, short rest period. I like that challenge and I like that feeling.
Yeah.
And I feel like it lures you into a false sense of security for what's to come, because what's to come is probably the most physically and emotionally draining aspect of training.
Yeah.
So the conditioning one is pretty easy going in terms of mindset. You get this payoff, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that becomes, once you can get past that first initial week or two of discomfort and lack of conditioning, once you build that work capacity, you feel pretty good.
Yes.
For me and my system, the next phase we go into is we kind of live in hypertrophy land for a while, and, like, broadly speaking, between 65 and 85%.
Yep.
And during that time, waving up and down between those percentages, we're really driving up the work and driving up the volume. And that is fucking work.
Yes.
It's really uncomfortable. It's really tough. And this is where a mindset really becomes important, because while you're doing that work and while you're really pushing your ability to recover from that volume and really trying to drive adaptation, it's hard and you feel really weak.
Yes.
You feel like you're struggling most sessions.
Yeah,
and I don't
especially
mean,
with weights that, potentially somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks ago, you were doing comfortably as warm-up sets without really thinking about it. And then all of a sudden you've got weights on the bar where you're like, well, this should just be a cruisy, easy set, and it completely cripples you. It's disheartening to say the least, I think.
Yeah, and it's easy to get focused on numbers like that and attach emotion to number based on experience like that. So what I mean is exactly what you said, while you're coming into a peak, let's say your max squat is 300 and you're doing 200 on the way up, and 200 just becomes, your warm-up weight.
An everyday number, yeah.
You do for a single without really any equipment, you just fucking blast it out. And then 200 kilos becomes your 6 sets of 6 or something like that. And all of a sudden, in your head, it's an easy weight. But you get on the bar for 6 sets of 6, you do your first set, and you're like, what the fuck? This was heavy as hell. That's what I mean. It feels, you kind of forget that all of a sudden you're doing 36 reps next to 1 rep over the course of, that session and building fatigue with each set. Of course, it's going to feel relatively heavier. But if you only attach this emotion to the number where it's like, this number is easy and that's all you think about, if it does feel hard, it'll send you cascading into the other direction, right?
Yeah. And I think that needing to feel strong all the time, like people get, I think, too caught up in, I'm not very strong at the moment. But if you're training for powerlifting, it's not about being strong at this point in your training cycle, right? Mm-hmm. No one gives a shit how strong you are 15 weeks out from a meet. It's about how strong you are on meet day. And so I think that's one of the most common mistakes, especially with that sort of high novice, low intermediate lifter who maybe hasn't quite bought into the whole idea yet. And they go through maybe their first or their second real true like hypertrophy work capacity phase, and they come to me and say, I feel really weak at the moment. Or they're the ones that are like rogue testing 1 rep maxes in the middle of a hypertrophy block. And they come in like, oh man, I lifted like 20 kilos under my best. It's like, yeah, well, of course you fucking did. You're not meant to be strong right now. Now's not about being strong. It's the difference between building strength and testing strength. Mm-hmm. This phase of training is all about building the base that sets up your peak, that sets up your performance on meet day. And so if you're expecting to feel really awesome and really fucking strong and powerful the whole time, I think you're setting yourself up for a bad time.
Exactly. It's really hard to grasp initially that the work you do that makes you stronger actively works against you being at your peak strength at that point in time.
Yes, exactly.
So if you do test your max while you're in the middle of a volume phase, especially higher up in the block before a deload, the fatigue that you're under, you're going to be really fucking disappointed.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly what you said is exactly the same thing as I say to my lifters. It's like, we only need to be strong when we need to be strong. All the other time we're doing the work to make us stronger. To make sure that when we do max out, when we do a competition, we're stronger than before. And that stuff in the middle, that's fucking work.
And like you said, it's the emotional attachment to like strength, right? And the ego that comes with being strong. And you're suddenly feeding this ego year round, trying to stay strong. It's where things like Westside are great if you're a somewhat egotistical person, because you just feel like you're fucking strong all the time because you're just hitting heavy singles and doubles and triples, and it's like, yeah, that's great and it'll work for a while, but are you really getting the best out of what you could be doing over the long term?
It's so hard to disconnect from those numbers. Like, we've spoken before plenty of times about how I'm a sterile, unemotional robot. But I really do just look at the weight on the bar as like weighted metal as a measure of resistance. It's like, it's just providing me resistance so I have something to push so I can get stronger. The actual number is totally irrelevant. But that's because I'm experienced in the sport and I know that my max strength is a certain number. I have confidence that this work is getting me stronger because I've seen it done time and time and time again, right?
Yeah.
Your first experience of that is not that easy. And it's
and
really
I think it's
tempting.
context, right? Like that experience is context. You know that feeling weak now means 12 weeks from now you'll feel strong.
Yeah.
But if you've not experienced that in the context of a 25-week training plan, you don't know that, 15 weeks out, it's meant to feel a bit shit. You're not meant to feel strong.
That's right. And it's really easy to just flip the switch and be like, no, I didn't feel like this last time. And last time I made a little bit of progress. So I'm just going to change gears. I'm going to max out. I'm going to do what I did before because that worked. And like,
trust the process. That's the hard part, is committing to, and this is where having a coach comes into play, right? Because when you have a coach, you can essentially just hand over the authority behind that. And if you're paying a coach and you're not doing what the coach is telling you to, you're doing the wrong thing. Like,
that's right.
If I'm going to pay someone to give me advice, I'm going to take the advice, right? Because you're investing in that person because you believe in the advice they're providing. And so if you're the person who's like, this is just not working, I don't feel really strong at the moment, and whether that's because you're 4 weeks out from a meet or 25 weeks out from a meet, it doesn't fucking matter. You're investing in this person's process so that they can be strong on a given day, and that involves the work. You've got to do the work, and it's not always going to feel great. You're not always going to feel poppy and smooth and crisp all the time. Sometimes it's going to feel like you've forgotten how to squat because everything's so fucking sore you can't move properly.
It's funny on that note, like you listen to a lot of podcasts or read a lot of things where people will be like, does that work? If it works, well then keep doing it. There's no reason to change. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, you could flatten out a snitcher with your forehead, but it's probably going to work better if you use a mallet, right? Just because something works doesn't mean there's not a better way. And it's like, it's really easy to get caught up in this idea that what you're doing is working. But oftentimes there's a way to do things better. And, if you've got this advice or you've changed gears and you're doing volume rather than maxing out every week, you're going to feel a little bit weak, like we keep saying, but it's going to work, right? If you structure it properly, and, getting your head around that sort of mindset around trusting the process, like you say, is going to be a really hard transition to make at first. And it's still kind of hard to deal with even once you do have that experience. Like, I have the experience, so when I get under the volume, like I've got volume deadlifts tonight, I'm going to do that volume. And it's an easy weight for me, but it's going to be really hard. And like, I've got that experience, so I can remind myself. But my first inclination in my head is like, this feels way harder than it should be. It's like,
like lizard brain Thomas is like, oh my God, I'm so weak. What the fuck?
Yeah, that's the first meathead response that I'll get.
Yep, 100%, dude.
Like, I have to convince myself, no, this is the work you need to do.
Yep.
And I think I'm experienced, and I coach people this all the time. Like, for someone who's not experienced and hasn't had that lived experience with hundreds of lifters, it's going to be the overwhelming, like, devil on your shoulder, right?
Yep, and very hard to get away from.
Yeah.
So after we get through what is inevitably a fairly miserable hypertrophy / work capacity phase, we go into some strength building, I guess, for the most part. Yeah. This is, if the hypertrophy is the work, this is the real miserable work that no one really wants to do but kind of does and hates it all the way through.
The strength phase, you mean?
No, not hates it. But this is the bit that gets really hard, I think. Like, hypertrophy's hard because it's volume. I think the strength phase becomes hard because it's the commitment to lifting really well. And again, not like, I think the overarching principle is don't let your ego get in the way.
Yeah.
Because if it's easy to get your ego in the way of a hypertrophy phase where you don't feel strong, it's then probably even easier to let your ego get in the way in a strength phase where, like, you almost feel strong and you've got the capability, or not the capability, but you're allowed to hit that little bit heavier, and it's then holding you back enough to know that you've got to just, like, you build it up gradually. You can't go straight out of hypertrophy into just fucking max triples.
Yeah. It's an interesting zone to be in, because it's like, say you get down to your fours and your triples and they're starting to get pretty fucking heavy. And you do your first rep and you're like, fuck yeah, I feel good. And then you're like, oh wait, I gotta do 2 more reps.
Yeah. And you do your second one, you're like, that was okay. And you do your third one, you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
I'm dead.
And it's interesting because the feeling, like the physical feeling changes, but that mental feeling of like grinding out your last rep doesn't really change from the hypertrophy to strength phase. So you get this, I guess, you get the same sort of signaling happening. You start to feel like you should be stronger at this stage, and it's easy to let that catch up to you. And I think that sort of, if we're talking like later in a strength block where you're getting ready to transition from strength to peak, that is where the psychological games start to happen. That is where the like, I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. This has all gone wrong. I want to pull out. Everything hurts. I think this is probably one of the...
It's the hardest bit about powerlifting.
Yeah, the real tipping... One of the real tipping points in training when it comes to powerlifting, right?
Yeah, I think both you and I, and probably anyone who's coached any serious powerlifters, has had the discussion with a or multiple lifters somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks out from a meet, where the discussion is like, man, I'm just tired all the time and I'm sore and all these weights feel really heavy and I'm just not sure if I'm ready for this meet and like I'm not sleeping well, and then suddenly they've got something else going on in their life and it all just starts to crumble into shit, or at least seem like it is. And my advice is almost always keep going.
Yeah.
Like you're meant to feel a little bit like this. I've said it to plenty of people recently and over the last several years. I know I'm going to have a relatively good meet when somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks out from the comp, I question every decision I've ever made that got me to that point in my life.
Yeah.
And I hate powerlifting and it's dumb and I don't know why I do this. I'm just constantly in this battle with myself about how much I hate myself. And then 3 weeks later, when all the volume's gone, I suddenly am like, oh yeah, okay, cool. I feel amazing now. It's great.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like I think we all respond slightly differently, but it's probably one of the most commonly held, I guess, emotional things that we share as powerlifters. It's like this distinct time frame where it's just that though those questions kind of come in.
Yeah, and it just sucks. And if you're not ready for it, it'll really catch you by surprise. And if you've never been there, like I've had a few people, again, sort of high, novice, low, intermediate lifters who've done a couple of meets and like had a good time, really enjoyed it. And they get through their like first real training cycle, you know, the first one that's got a bit more volume, a bit more specificity. It's a bit heavier. They haven't just sort of been riding that wave anymore. It's now like they actually have to do the work, and they always come in and you can see it on their face when they walk in. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. You're 4 weeks out. That's why you look so miserable. And if you're not ready for it, you don't know it's coming. And like I try and let everyone know that like you're meant to feel a bit shit at this point. But even people that know it and have been through it before will still come and have the same conversation. I'm not ready. I feel weak. I'm tired. I'm hungry. All of these sort of things. Like all of these are the signs of overreaching, right? That's the whole principle behind super compensation and actually getting the strength out of that phase and in through the peak is the idea that you've got to do just a little bit more than you can actually recover from in those final weeks, so that you taper everything off and you come back in stronger on the day. Because like we said before, it's about being strong on the day. It's not about being strong the whole time through a training cycle. It's about that one day that matters. And that's the cool thing about powerlifting. It's not that hard to be strong-ish all the time. It's really hard to be very strong on one day and on a day that has been decided by someone else.
Yeah.
It's why your comp lifts count more than your Instagram lifts.
It's funny you mentioned those ideas of like supercompensation, overreaching and stuff like that, because it's like this kind of emotional attack falls right in the zone where it's like the volumes come off, so you've adapted and you're a bit stronger now, but the fatigue is still lingering around, right? So generally what I experience with my lifters and with myself is that everything feels really fucking heavy, like really heavy. But you watch back on videos and they're fast, they're strong, they're crisp, they're smooth, like they look really good. And like That's why, like you said, that's why filming yourself is so important. So you have that visual feedback.
You have an objective third party.
That's going to help you.
The advantage of a coach is the advantage of being able to film yourself, all those sort of things.
That's going to give you that confidence to just be like, well, I am actually strong enough. That did move well. For me, and like dealing with my lifters when they kind of come into this sort of mindset, there's a lot of talk around, okay, well, this is the formula that I use. This is like the principle, the formula that I use to make people strong. And this is what happens every single time. And it's like, if you're doing this work, if you're achieving these numbers or achieving these volumes or, existing within this range, I know you're getting stronger.
Yes.
And, just have confidence in the fact that I've done this a billion times before. Yes. And I know it's going to work for you. Just hang on to that,
Yeah.
And again, it's like you say, that's the importance of having like the discernment of a third party or a second party,
Yeah, and I think that is the hardest part as an athlete, is to trust in a process that doesn't feel like it's working. Because you get to that point where everything feels heavy, it feels slow and hard, and it takes you a while to warm up and those sort of things. So it's emotionally draining to deal with that all the time, and having someone to, even just a subtle reminder, like just keep going, keep going, put one foot in front of the other and chip away with it. Because that's what the whole sport is about, right? It is a fairly monotonous, fairly boring sport in the scheme of things, because all you're really doing is squatting and benching and deadlifting, right? But if you enjoy the process, you then get to sort of celebrate the training cycle with the outcome, which is the meat, right? If you are willing to put up with a little bit of suck for a while, you get to have the good day on the platform. If you're unwilling to do the little bit of selective suffering in training, then you're going to find that meat day is never as good as you think it is.
So I think this is probably a good time to come back to that idea of community, because this is where this exact zone is where community helps so much. And it doesn't even have to be physical community. It needs to be connecting with people that are sharing that pain. I mean, a lot of the time that connection comes from pain. That's why CrossFit's fucking so successful, because everyone 100%. Can die in the WOD and then be like, oh man, WOD whatever fucking kicked my ass. You sharing that pain, right?
Oh, dude, having played rugby, I've been exposed to that idea for a very long time. That, like, we used to do Hour of Power on Tuesday afternoons. We'd train Tuesday and Thursdays, and on Tuesday afternoons for the first hour of our 90-minute training session, we would just do a miserable conditioning session. And the only thing that gets you through a conditioning session like that is the group of boys around you. And I think the same thing, and this is where people talk about powerlifting being a team sport, like, oh, you need help and all of those sort of things. Like, it's not even a team sport. It's that having people to suffer with makes it bearable. Because when you're doing it by yourself, it's always going to be harder. And I think it's especially valid. And I think the same thing applies for like dieting and stuff as well. It's like having a group of friends that you can all collectively whinge about how you're a bit sick of chicken and rice. And the same thing goes for powerlifting meets, right? Having a group of friends who can go, oh, like, I feel shit at the moment. Well, yeah, so do I. And it's not a competition. Yeah. It's not like who feels shitter. Your pain's no less valid because of the pain I'm experiencing. But having people to go through that with will just make everything easier.
Of course, and it helps that encouragement. It's like, oh man, that set felt so shit. It's like, yeah, me too, but look how fast it was. Like, that was so fast, man. You're looking so strong. It's like we lift each other up at that stage, and 100%. We remind each other that we're all in the same boat, and that really helps.
And even if we're not prepping for the same meet, we've been there, you know. It's empathy through experience. Right? Like, I can empathize with that feeling because I've been there. I know what it feels like and how much it sucks. And even just being surrounded by people that you can talk to about what you're experiencing, so that you can have your experiences validated a little bit. Like, oh, okay, cool. Like, because I think that makes it much easier, right? If you know that it's meant to feel a bit shit and all these things are relatively normal. Because I've had people like overhear me having a discussion with one person, like, man, I didn't realize. I'm like, oh yeah, like all this is perfectly valid and acceptable and predictable. And they go, oh, okay. Oh, all right. Well, that makes sense. Cool. I'm okay with it then.
Yep.
You know, just knowing that it's okay to feel like this and it's kind of accepted as part of the process makes the whole thing easier to deal with. And I think the big thing is, you know, you have an end date, right? That's the cool thing about powerlifting. The suffering is there's a finish line to it.
It's an interesting psychological process to go through as well, to be like, you're so focused on the comp and then you just want the comp to never be there, and then you get past that point and then you really want to do the comp again, and then you start peaking and then you're like, my body's breaking and I just want the comp to be over so I can get the conditioning work. Yep. Like, you go through these phases. It's really interesting.
It's always you're always looking over the fence, right? You're always like, what's coming next? Because what I'm doing now sucks a bit.
So that kind of gives us a broad overview of like the training spectrum. One thing I wanted to ask you, like, let's say I'm your lifter and I come to you and I'm like, man, I feel like giving up. Every session's a challenge. Like, how do you deal with lifters, or how would you deal with yourself if you get to that point where, you know, it's not just a one-off session that feels really bad. It's like I want to quit kind of thing.
I think the first and most important process is to have a discussion about what else is happening in life, because like, your training doesn't happen in a vacuum. None of us are professional powerlifters. None of us are living the life of a professional athlete where all you do is eat, sleep, and train. And so what's happening outside the gym is going to have a substantial impact upon your recovery and how training feels at any point in a training cycle, right? So this is the same discussion I have with everyone, regardless of where they are in a training cycle, when they come to me and say, okay, I feel like shit. This sucks. I'm not sure I can do this anymore. All right, cool. Well, what's happening? Like, how are you sleeping? What's your nutritional intake like? How are you dealing with relationship stress? Those sort of things. What's work like at the moment? All of these sort of things. I have a lifter recently who I had this discussion with like 4 weeks out, and this person is like working full-time, studying, maintaining a relationship, just moved house, dealing with an injury, like some injury stuff, and all of these sort of issues that are layered on top of the stress of training. So everything you do in training is a stress, and the analogy I've always used is, imagine like a bucket with a flow tap on the outside, right? And all of your stress is liquid. All of those liquids go into the same bucket, and you've got to be able to drain it at the similar rate to the rate at which it's being filled. And when you ignore all of the stress outside of training and just focus on, well, training feels like shit. It's like, yeah, but if you're only sleeping 4 hours a night, that's not a huge surprise. So that's my first port of call. What else is happening in life, and where are you at? Because there's a small to moderate chance that that's part of a significant part of why it feels so shitty, especially if it's outside of a point at which I would expect you to feel shit. You know, if it's not that sort of 4 to 6 week period out, maybe you're like 10 weeks out and you feel really terrible, we'll have that discussion about what else is happening in life. If you can honestly cross all of those off as not factors, because you're managing your sleep well, you're eating well, all of those sort of things. And 9 times out of 10, no one can actually honestly cross all of those things off, because we're humans and most of us are relatively responsible adults who have lives outside of the gym. If they can cross all of those off, then we'll have a discussion about, okay, maybe we need to manage what you're doing in training and perhaps approach it a little bit differently. Maybe we take some of the volume out. Maybe we make things just a little bit easier. I think that's the sort of low-hanging fruit, right? Like, trim a little bit off the session, make sure you're doing the work in recovery, make sure you're eating well, and then we can have a more frank discussion about, okay, where are you at and why are you feeling like this? Because first you've got to rule all of those factors out. Yeah, of course. And then on the flip side of that, there's like, what about those individual sessions that people just want to walk away from? Like, you come in feeling like shit because maybe those external stresses are bearing down on you. Some days, just go home. Like, just fucking stop what you're doing, go home. Because some days it's not worth adding that stress to the bucket. Whether that's because you've just had a massive fight with your girlfriend and you're feeling miserable and maybe you feel like you need to relieve some of that stress through training, but then it's like, okay, do the bare minimum work and go home. Don't completely scrap the session, because I almost always think doing something is better than doing nothing.
Yeah, see, I'm more on that side of the fence. It's like you'll get a positive payoff if you feel like you've accomplished something.
Yes,
so
exactly.
If the weights aren't going to happen for the day, get the volume done. Drop the weight by 30 kilos and just get some work done and feel like you've done. You're going to feel a lot better doing that than scrapping the session and then feeling like you're a failure because you missed one session or something.
And that's the thing is, my first recommendation is not just go home. That's like, okay, we've had this serious discussion about you've dropped some of the weight, you still feel like it's crushing you. Like, maybe just pull the pin on that one and come back another day. And that's going to happen to everyone, right? There are sessions that everyone will go through at some point in a long enough training career where actually it's probably better if you don't do that session. It shouldn't be used as an excuse to not do the work and just sort of wimp out of everything you do. But it's also not like a sacrilegious sin that you're going to completely lose all of your strength gains for, right? Like, it's because it's about a bigger picture.
Yeah, I think especially I'd be far more on the side of not doing the work if it's a body feeling, if you feel like you're going to get injured or you're sore and you're in pain. Yes. Whereas for me, if it's an emotional thing or a fatigue thing.
Oh, yeah.
I think of coming back from Fiji a couple of weekends ago. I came back, I flew in on Tuesday morning and I was fucked. I hadn't eaten all weekend. I'd hardly slept. And I went in and tried to squat, and the squats were the hardest squats I've ever done in my fucking life. And I wanted to quit every set. And the videos were telling me, that actually looks pretty good. But in my head, it was like, quit.
Yep.
And so sometimes you have to remind yourself.
It's not meant to be easy.
Yeah, it's not meant to be easy. And it's like the video was saying, I'm physiologically capable. My mind was saying, no, you're not. So it's kind of getting into this battle between the two and fighting whether I actually want to do this, which I didn't. And then overriding with, do I need to do this? And I'm like, if I want to get to where I want to be and I'm capable of doing the work right now, I need to do this. So it became less of a choice. That's like going to work on a day where you don't want to go to work.
Yeah.
You can't just take sick days every time you don't feel like going to work. We can, but you probably shouldn't.
No, but having the option of a sick day is an important part.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it becomes this continuation of the idea of self-awareness, right? Knowing how you feel on any given day. And this is where I think having a relatively consistent warm-up process is really useful. So you can have an approach that allows you to have like a check-in process for how you feel on any given day, and something that you can do consistently that becomes your measuring stick for how you feel, right? So you can have that like, okay, well, I'm doing this and I feel a bit worse than I normally do. So, okay, cool. I'll spend a little bit more time doing this. Okay, I still feel a bit worse. Spend a bit more time warming up. And you can have these little markers at different points in a training session that become part of the check-in process and allow you to really assess objectively, or at least relatively objectively, how you feel and how relevant that is to what the work is at hand. Skipping a session because it's 25 weeks out from a comp, and you've just had a huge fight with your girlfriend, you just got sacked from your job and you haven't eaten since Tuesday. Like, okay, maybe just like take a day off, go home, rest, relax. But 4 weeks out from a meet's not the time to be lazy and to accept your own excuses.
Yeah. Cool.
I think that's...
I think it's a cool place to end it. I'm actually going to steal that analogy now. Like, I always call the training in the middle there, I always refer to it as work, and I refer to training as work. Yeah. And I like this idea of having sick days.
Yeah. It's, as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, actually, that's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Because everyone should have you should have the option of a sick day, but it shouldn't be your first port of call.
Yeah. And then we need to work in other analogies to fit in with it. Maybe like...
you can go on strike.
Penalty rates, annual leave.
I think the strike thing. Are you a member of a union? We're going to start a lifters union. What you're going to end up with, Thomas, is 100 of your lifters who've started a union, and then you'll start getting people picketing your training services. We're not doing this volume until you give us more rest.
More bicep curls. Sweet. All right, that's us. Give us 5 stars. Love us. Tag us on your Instagram. Do all that stuff that we say every episode.
Tell your mum.
Tell your mum. See ya.